Welcome. From barrels to batteries, decoding energy's next chapter, an Energetics podcast. This is Mohit Kaul. For those of you who may be new here, Energetics is world's leading energy market intelligence platform, combining deep data, sharp analytics with consulting and advisory support for companies across the energy value chain. In season one, I sit down with startup founders and industry builders who are reshaping the energy system from hydrocarbons to electrons, from legacy scale to innovation. In each episode, we explore their journey, the pivotal decisions they have made, and how they think about the challenges and opportunities ahead of us. Let's get started. Today, I'm joined by Joel, co-founder and CEO of EcoSuite. EcoSuite is building a digital platform designed to help developers, operators, and asset owners manage distributed energy resources more effectively. How? Using data, automation, and AI to optimize performance and reduce operational risk across solar and storage portfolios. What I particularly find interesting about Joel's journey is that he's approaching the energy transition from the operational side, solving very real challenges, actually deploying at scale, and managing to improve efficiency overall. In a world where distributed energy portfolios are becoming increasingly complex, having reliable source of truth for assets, for data, and for decision making, I believe is critical. Joel has spent years working at the intersection of energy, software, and data, and EcoSuite is an attempt to bring those pieces together to make distributed gen more efficient and easier to scale. Joel, I'm glad you could join us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, really happy to be here.
All right, so let's get started, and let's start from the beginning. So my first question to you is, what originally drew you into the distributed gen space, and what made you decide that this was an industry worth building a company in, career in, potentially multiple careers in? What drove you, and what made you stay?
Yeah, I love reminiscing. So glad to start there. And there's a couple of milestones that I often look at, but I'll just start kind of from the beginning. I mean, I was a student of aerospace engineering and finance, so always have kind of had a affinity for complex systems and markets, and maybe the kind of collision of those things, which I think you could define the energy space as. And it was around 2015 when I really discovered solar. At the time was what kind of drew me in, and there were a couple factors. I mean, at that time, solar was just at like the just before really the inflection point that we've seen over the last decade plus in terms of deployment and real growth. So it was clearly just ready for a growth spurt, and you can kind of feel that by studying the market. It was, around that same time when I was looking at the industry and studying it, that being based out of New York, there was a program that many folks will know, especially in the DG space, called VDER, or Value of Distributed Energy Resources in New York. Kind of this complicated tariff for valuing solar and storage and DERs at large. And I read the order when it first came out, and I kind of nerded out on it. It was like this really unique, first of its kind mechanism that incorporated like spatial and temporal elements into how to value assets. And it just kind of occurred to me that A, that was really complicated, and B, there's going to be opportunities to, build businesses, innovate both on the technology side and the market side. And it drew me in, right? And I think that sort of intersection of an old system with these new complex products and opportunities and DERs seemed like a really cool trajectory to follow. And I never looked back. I dove head first, and here we are today.
Interesting, from aerospace to, let's say, solar in 2015, and then now. How would you say your perspective has changed, right? 11 years ago, what did you think of the industry? Did you think that it's complicated? Do you now feel it's complicated? Did you imagine what you were getting into? Overall, how do you think that your perspective has changed from 2015 to today?
It's a great question. I guess it's just kind of maybe sharpened a bit, right, with respect to what I focus on. So I in those earlier days in my career, I was very much on, you kind of alluded to this in your very thoughtful intro, right? I was more on the operational side, like development, financing, asset management. So, literally doing the kind of in the trenches, right? Doing the hard work that DG industry players do to get projects from dirt to operating power plants. And I think that perspective was healthy starting point because you get to feel all the pain points, and it was where I met all of my current co-founders, and it allows you to speak the language of the industry, which is really important when you're now in the position that I am now in, which is on the technology side. So now I have the technology perspective, but my customers are my former self, right? And being able to speak that language and give the customer the confidence that you've felt the pain points they're currently feeling, I think goes a really long way. But in terms of how, so I guess in terms of how my perspective has changed, it is really just that. Like, I think focusing on the technology side has just, and talking to all the folks that are leveraging technology, both the DG developers and like the grid side, something we're doing a lot these days at EcoSuite, utility, like grid operators. There's just a real drive, maybe more now than ever, to leverage technology in various ways to do the job of development, operations, flexibility on the grid to do these things better. And I think the technology's there. So it's now just at a moment of like, how do we adopt it faster? And that's a really exciting point, I think, in the industry for everybody.
I like to go deeper into something that you mentioned, when you spoke about today, you're selling to your former self and the pain points that you talked about. Would there be a specific moment or let's say an insight, an experience that pushed you to take the leap and start EcoSoup, right? Is there a pain point or is there an experience that you could recall?
Yeah, maybe it's kind of like, death by a thousand cuts to some degree, right? Meaning, like, I don't know if it was a specific moment, but I think the inspiration for EcoSuite was sort of this recognition that across the entire life cycle of developing an asset, even something you would think as straightforward as just a solar system, put storage and grid flexibility aside for a moment, like that's even more complicated. But along the entire life cycle, there's very, I think, if you've had the opportunity to be in the seat, there are just opportunities for efficiency on every corner. And so I think maybe part of me was always drawn to figuring out what those efficiencies might be, surrounding myself with technologists that can help extract those efficiencies in the form of a product. I would say certainly there was a moment that I can think about where when we, early on in earlier on, this is around 2018, so a few years into my kind of development career, where I originally met the co-founding team at EcoSuite on the folks more on the technical side, and I think the perspective that they brought to the room inspired me for sure because it was it was purely from the kind of technology perspective and bringing the sense that, like, just because we do things a certain way today doesn't mean that's how we should do things kind of
Mhm.
tomorrow. But change is hard. And so we really balance each other out. So I think it was in meeting my co-founding team that it just solidified to me that, like, this is what I want to focus on. Right. I felt the pain points. I now met, I've met a team that I think have the brain power and the vision to, like, make a change and build a product. And so we ran with that kind of momentum, and here we are.
I'm tempted to kind of just ask you a little more about that, you know, your your group, right? The group of co-founders, and if you could talk more about that, what was the early years process like, and how did you guys think about this? What influenced the most? Yeah, because you kind of hinted about it, but let's just before we deep dive, I want to deep dive into EcoSuite after this, but it wouldn't be fair to deep dive into EcoSuite without talking about the co-founders first. Let's very briefly talk about the team and what you would like to share about.
Yeah, the history is an important part of the story, so I appreciate that. So I kind of alluded to it, right?
Right.
Co-founding team met each other about 7, almost 8 years ago now. And so this was under the umbrella of a developer IPP business, actually. So our former firm, and it was in that firm that we started developing kind of some of the core tools that is EcoSuite, and we'll kind of expand on what those are. And then we spun out EcoSuite to be the sort of platform that it is today, serving the broader industry. So that history is really important, right? It goes back to all of us being operators first, and you know, driving for the kind of requirements and constraints and opportunities that a developer IPP business focusing on the C&I scale, like DG space, has. So really being elbow to elbow, really, with the customer on a day-to-day basis. So the co-founding team is myself, the CEO of that developer IPP, right? And two folks who have developed really what is the core infrastructure of EcoSuite from a technology perspective. So these are
Mhm.
this is a software developer background with, you know, 30 years, building technology, and a grid edge integration expert. So somebody who really appreciates the kind of low level data plumbing complexities and challenges that owner operators have, right? Uh, so it was the four of us, and building the platform alongside what is now a customer of ours in our former firm, um, was a really, really fantastic starting point to experiment, to build tools that had real impact. And yeah, I think it's given us a very healthy perspective and start point for what EcoSuite is today.
Great, and I think that sounds like a very good team with four of you kind of covering four corners. Let's talk about EcoSuite now, right? Uh, and you let me try to frame this well. So in I understand you focus on DG, but you just also hinted some bit on the utility side, maybe. So I want to understand what problem are you most focused on solving right now, and why do you believe it matters the most? I think let's get that to our listeners first. That what problem does EcoSuite solve, and why does that problem matter?
Yeah. I think at its core, EcoSuite is an asset management platform. So I always asterisk that with like, asset management starts before operations, even though you might traditionally not think that. So I include so what do we help? What problems do we help with? We help developers accelerate the pull-through rate of projects, and we help asset managers, optimize performance and benchmark performance. And we do this particularly well for large portfolios. We do that by offering kind of a normalization layer, a data platform that allows them to kind of collate all of the often incoherent and not cohesive data that they're confronted with throughout the life cycle of a development and an operating asset. And I think what we see out there is very much is still the case is like, many players are still, leveraging very old school methods for bringing projects through the development cycle. And there's often a very, it's kind of if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality type of uh, sentiment out there. But we believe that kind of the opportunities to leverage, asset data in a normalized way will not only help these companies like operate their own businesses better, derive insights on what they should be prioritizing, help them address performance issues faster. It will also, and I think most importantly with all of this, is like, it will also, in I think, transactional efficiencies, this kind of bleeds more into your world, transactional efficiencies across stakeholders. So from one company to the next, where I think the unlock for opportunity really, really starts to broaden, right? So that is the kind of the core problem and what we're doing at a high level. Uh, and look, a big part of the technology stack, you have your software layer, but a big part of the technology stack and the data problem is actually at the device level, right? Every operating asset has a data acquisition system where performance data emanates from. And one of the big challenges that we see, especially these days, is that like, that data uh, can be uh, captive. It can be difficult to get access to, difficult to share, difficult to leverage for various applications. So one of our core ethos, and differentiators is like open source, right? Opening access to data, bringing that normalization and opening it up to the world so that we could all move faster.
I think Joe, that's such a great point, right? We can all move faster. I hope everybody thinks like that, right? If all of us move faster, the industry would. I want to get into what you said about old school methods, right? So from your experience, what would you say is the toughest challenge, right? And I'm specifically talking about aligning digital innovation with the realities of these assets, right? Like you said, the device and then how important that data is, right? So, what would you say is the toughest challenge to getting this solid tech stack in a very traditional, complex industry that has, these assets, hundreds of assets in multiple different locations, right? Is it difficult to get digital innovation inside such a traditional mindset or industry?
Yeah, I think it is. I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we said that it was just like easy. There's a lot I think that I can think of. Switching costs comes to mind, right? So again, the how do you encourage somebody who's, it's working fine.
Yeah.
It's I can deal with all of these spreadsheets and, spend more hours than maybe I should, but I can execute my task, right? Whether that be like underwriting a project or putting together like a monthly asset management report in a manual way without leveraging kind of any fancy tools. Yeah, so I think switching costs is a big thing, and it will be there for a long time. And I think especially that's true for larger enterprises and organizations. So where we tend to see interesting entry points is, when businesses are really actively trying to either a scale up, right? They're actively acquiring assets. They are growing and maybe trying to build out, like they're a developer trying to build out the IPP portion of their business, or they just have a real acute issue. And that for us has looked like, just for example, like the deprecation of data acquisition systems. So imagine you have a solar system, it has you know, it's collecting data, and then the proprietary solution that you've leveraged to collect that data from your site is no longer around. We see a lot of stranded assets that we can come in and basically unlock, right? So replace that proprietary solution with an open source one, future proof, right? Mitigate that risk in the future, and also just unlock the data that's needed for that asset manager to do their job. So we've done a lot of that type of work, what I often refer to as like data plumbing work. We're very comfortable sort of executing at that layer.
That tells me to ask you around the product, right? Like we talked about switching costs, and then also the fact that we can make an asset manager more efficient. Let's call it that. But from a product point of view, if you could very maybe simplify it for let's say my grandmom, right? What do you think from a product point of view today hits home when you talk to a client, right? What's that product adoption idea that you see flexibility that people show in adopting?
Yeah. I think it's just, you know, consolidation. If I had to pick one word,
Got it.
and 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 then obviously underneath that, it is doing that in ways that encourages that sort of cross stakeholder mindset, right? So, but consolidation across this entire ecosystem, which is complex. I mean, as well as any. When I talk about consolidation of data on EcoSuite to customers, I think there's, you know, the differentiator with respect to our
Mm,
platform and maybe others is that we're very confident offering consolidation across the full life cycle, right? So it's not just the energy data coming from the performance of the asset. It is everything from economics, contractual obligation, documents, all to serve as effectively like a data foundation for our customers to then build off of, right? But in a word, consolidation, I think that is still very much where a lot of the industry is at in terms of getting their ducks in a row. And then we talk about, we can talk about all the future exciting AI stuff, but none of that really is as exciting without a rock solid foundation.
I'm sure, and tell me if I'm right or wrong here. Do people still just manage things like this through spreadsheets?
There's a lot of that still.
There's
Yeah.
all of that, right? Yeah. That's so beautiful. Like we talk about that and then AI, right? It's quite a disjoint, and I think eventually we'll get there. Eventually, I still love spreadsheets, right? I even today, if I have to do like something very simple, I would first open a spreadsheet and start typing on it or writing formulas on it. I
Same
still
here.
like it, but all right. Let's talk about the broader industry and see. I'll give you my perspective on this point. At Analytics, we often, like you understand, we track investments, right? It could be financings, it could be, so we track investment activity across the energy landscape. And we often see a gap in terms of where the capital is flowing and where the projects are actually getting built and scaled. Do you see that in the DG space as well? Do you see any disconnect between, where capital is being deployed versus, where real execution would matter? Is there any kind of that misalignment that you see where you I wish there were more people deploying capital towards hydrogen and solving a problem. I was just trying to tell you what I was thinking about last year when hydrogen was really interesting industry. I would think that, hey, why don't people deploy more money and dollars on hydrogen, research on hydrogen, and then make it economically effective? Do you see that kind of a disjoint in where you would say, hey, why don't people do more of distributed gel storage, right? Are there any thoughts like that? Or do you think that, at least from an industry point of view, we are very aligned? Money is where scale is required. What's your perspective on that? Any misalignment between execution and capital?
It's a very interesting question. Uh, yeah, my head goes to storage a little bit. You kind of briefly mentioned it,
Right.
just
Yeah.
with respect to it still being clearly from our perspective, being very clearly nascent in its adoption. You would think there are many obvious places for storage from an economic perspective, but yet
Right.
the complexities of actually getting it done, again, putting the developer hat on, makes it prohibitive in a lot of scenarios where you would think it would make sense. And again, this is DG. I think there are plenty of maybe obvious applications at the larger utility scale, but from a broad-based perspective, C&I and maybe behind the meter, DG storage it feels like it's ripe for its breakout moment, but hasn't seen it yet.
Right.
So maybe
Yeah.
that's the disconnect. And yeah, I'm sure behind the scenes, without doing that, I've done some of this, but given storage has evolved a lot over the recent years, like I'm sure behind the scenes, there's a lot of education happening with larger institutions and financiers about the merchant risk reward for DG storage. But it is not until that education kind of is complete where checks will start being written and dollars will start flowing, and we'll start seeing more of that deployed. So I think that's one for sure that jumps out. I'm tempted to offer another, which
Go ahead,
is,
please, please. You have to.
yeah, which is maybe a little bit more out there, I guess, for lack of a better adjective. Like there's a lot of murmurs about this concept of flexible interconnection.
Hmm.
And this is popping up in various markets here and there. So it's this concept that all right, we all know interconnection is a challenge. That goes without saying. We've kind of neglected to, I don't think there's been anything really new with respect to interconnection. We're trying to do it faster. I think utilities are resource constrained. We're upgrading the grid in many scenarios where we may not need to. And that's just the time associated with the process eats away at economics. All this is classic. We're all aware. But I think there is a really big opportunity for flexible interconnection that we're getting exposure to kind of in the belly of the beast, so to speak. So this goes to our utility grid operator work where, you know, utilities are very conscious that all right, feeders are saturated. We want more solar on the grid. Uh, you know, at the end of the day, at the end of the road, more solar is beneficial for ratepayers. It will drive down more electrons on our wires will drive down the cost for ratepayers. I think we all sort of understand this, but yet the sticking point becomes how do you actually incentivize flexible interconnection? And so we're working with Pepco in Washington, D.C. right now to
Oh, nice.
deliver the technology. Our edge compute nodes are hooked up to solar systems. They allow for visibility and control of smart inverters, solar, and other DERs. We're doing storage as well. And we can deliver the controls to the utility operator for them to sort of play with. And by doing that, we offer them a platform for flexible interconnection.
Hmm.
But the sort of there still remains this sticking point of like, okay, wait, let's just take a solar system. If I want to interconnect my solar system here, you're telling me I need to give you control of my inverters. That means you can curtail me when you might need to curtail me when there's grid constraints. Developers can't get comfortable with it. Financiers, institutional dollars can't get comfortable with that.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I think this is a big disconnect where like we would all be doing more projects. We'd be saving a heck of a lot of money, both on the developer side and the utility side in interconnection costs, not only the physical upgrades, but like the time and effort spent on interconnection in exchange for what would be like, you know, you, you've seen estimates of what would be relatively modest curtailment, but yet flexible interconnection is not being widely adopted. So I think this is a really interesting disconnect and the industry kind of pain point that I'm super excited about at this moment is like I think flexible interconnection is a massive opportunity if implemented in a way that, grid operators can sort of have a little bit more control over their system. And I think it will be better for everybody at the end of the day. But we have some sort of policy hurdles to get over.
Right, right. And this is really interesting. I'll go a little deeper here.
Yeah, yeah.
Are there any early trends or shifts that you're seeing in this that kind of further support, maybe you could talk more about what you're doing in Washington or otherwise that support this thought. And I'll give you what I'm thinking. You know, when we look at M&A data every day, right? Sometimes we tend to catch early signals before they make to headlines. Right. So I'm trying to understand, is flexible interconnection one of those early signals that you are catching on that is not probably made to the headlines right now? But are there any actual shifts in thought processes, in implementation, or any trends that you would like to add on to just support that argument further? This, for me, this is really interesting.
I love it. I think so. Maybe just taking the perspective of the project I alluded to, I think the most exciting thing is that, you know, th- there's very real kind of collaborative spirit and like very real intention from the grid operator
Hmm.
to like figure this out. How can I deliver grid flex or how can I incorporate grid flexibility in a scalable way? And that's kind of like step one, because we talk about flexible interconnection all day, but if the utility can't rely on a platform that's like cost effective for everybody to
Hmm.
do that at scale, um, there will always be that sort of very real uh, bottleneck. So I think that's really important. I mean, just that as an indicator, like there's intention, there's like a desire from the
Right.
grid operator to build the platforms that allow this. And I think that without being in actually in the room, but I think if you run that up the chain at a grid operator, right, that pressure is coming top down. That's like rates are going. It's all the macro stuff. Rates are going up. My ratepayers are 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 in pain. Market's crazy. PJM is out of control. Right. Capacity auction is causing a lot of this data centers, whatnot, the classic headlines,
Right. Right.
all of that's coming down to like the folks with boots on the ground that deal with the interconnection applications, that are the engineers, that are the IT, cybersecurity folks, and they're being pressed to like figure it out. So that's an indicator that I think is very, very exciting. On the Yeah, I don't know, maybe on the on the flip side, I think that's the probably the biggest one. But on the flip side, like the developer side, it's being talked about more, maybe. Like, I don't know. I feel like
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
conference I go to, there's a session on what can we do here? Like, how do we do interconnection better? And I think
Yeah.
that gives me some hope as well.
Right, right. How I look at not just but any other opportunity in general is that, is there enough political will? Like, and that could be regulatory or otherwise. And is there enough capital being deployed towards that will? Right. If you have those two indicators kind of merging, and I think interconnection will see that. I think it definitely will see that because it's like you said, it's a session in every conference. So, and it's a conversation that happens every day, and it just doesn't feel right to have interconnection queues that today go into years, right? Like we are much faster today than we were many years ago, but that particular thing has probably not evolved, but it will. I truly believe, and there are enough signs, like you said. All right. Let's completely change tracks. I want to explore a bit on how things have changed. Let's call it from a leadership point of view, and it could be both external as well as internal. So, as the industry has evolved, right? We have evolved financially. We have, of course, evolved geopolitically. I think decision making has become more data driven, and then you and I wanted to be more data driven, but I think we've still come a long way. I think our clients today are more risk aware than they were previously. So with this data and awareness, how has your leadership style changed? As the stakes have changed, right? How do you operate internally at EcoSuite, and then how do you operate externally when you're kind of marketing and selling your solutions? Has there been a change as clients have started to mature?
It's a it's a very interesting question. My brain goes to just a broader bit of context, I guess. I mean, maybe first of all, like with respect to my personal leadership approach to the team, generally speaking, at least I like to think that's been relatively consistent. And I'm not sure that like the market's going to do crazy things and the industry is going to evolve. But I think, what impacts my leadership style is more about what's happening with my team and the way that we work together, the way that we collaborate, and the business that we want to build versus the external factors. That's more about strategy, and how we like navigate the landscape. That being said, I do think so. The broader context that I was kind of alluding to is we've started EcoSuite at a very interesting time. I think, meaning like we're a software technology business at our core. I think even just like whatever 3-ish years ago, the classic roadmap for what it meant to build a technology, especially a software company, was very different. I think the assumptions were very different. And that I think has a lot to do with, today there's an opportunity to be a whole lot more capital efficient with how you build teams, whether that's because, hybrid work is a thing, whether that's because I think one more interesting and exciting things, like we're getting a whole lot more leverage out of the people that we have because of the tools available to us. AI, I think if there's an AI story to talk about it, it's way more about like how technology companies leverage AI to provide products and services than it is about the AI product or service they're selling to the market, right? And that has been incredible to witness over the last several years of like the software team we have is 10x as productive as it was, and it's just the same
True.
same crew. We've added a couple folks over the years, but it's like the leverage we're getting on the team is wild. So I think as a leadership team, we're very conscious of that, right? When it comes to how we build the team, how we maintain capital efficiency in a market that's evolving fast. So that's internal. And externally, I think it's about, it kind of comes back to one thing I mentioned earlier. It's about solving a real problem. There's no longer people just, buying software just to buy software. It's got
Mm,
to address a serious problem that they have, and that problem needs to be at the top of their list because they are similarly thinking about capital efficiency. They are tightening their belt. That's a very kind of clear industry trend. So I think like, yeah, we are just very, very adamantly focused about as a team, when we're outward facing, we're talking about the product, we need to hone in on, I gave you very broad strokes about what EcoSuite is, how we think about the world, what problems we can solve. But in reality, like in many cases, it's just like customer X doesn't know how their portfolio is performing because they don't have the data. Let's solve that problem. And that helps them, that adds value immediately, right? That's immediate ROI. So I think it's kind of an obvious one maybe, but it's important to sort of level set. Is like, if you're not coming in and solving an immediate problem, there's not appetite for the solution right now.
Exactly, exactly. And I think the point that you said about ROI and people looking for solutions to a real problem, people are just buying software because they're just buying software. They're specifically buying so that it solves a real problem for them. Let's say in the next decade, like in the next 10 years, what impact would you like to leave as EcoSuite, right? What is that impact? What is that ROI? What is that problem? Yeah. What's the impact that you would like to leave in the next 10 years as a company?
Yeah, it's a big question. I could think of it. Obviously, we have ambitions and we want to change the world. We think the opportunity is transformational. But coming back to the the ethos that I alluded to probably a couple times here, just around like open access to data, open source infrastructure. I think you know, if we are successful in the next 10 years, we will see a future where the industry has embraced a lot of the open standards and open source infrastructure that we're very big proponents of. And because the reason I think that would be a sign of success is because in that future, we will be moving faster. We will be transacting faster. We'll all be speaking the same like language, right? With respect to assets, we'll be doing more deals. We'll be interconnecting assets faster. So I think in 10 years time, if the industry has embraced a lot of the open standards that we put out there in the world as, worth embracing, open standards and true open source technology, that will be a big win for EcoSuite and for the industry.
Great. That's a great point. And I really hope and I'm sure that'll happen. Let's do a couple of minutes before we close. If there are any young founders who are listening to this, and I'm sure there are many challenges that some kids sitting in a college dorm today could be thinking of solving in the energy industry, right? So let's quickly do a couple of short questions for them. So if there was one trend that you would recommend them to focus on, or something that would be relevant next 3 to 5 years to building a company, what would that be?
Interconnection. Is this like a lightning round
Interconnect.
style? I'll do one word. I'll do one words. Yeah. I think everything that's happening around interconnection, I think, is quite interesting.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking that. Okay, next one. What's one mistake that you see founders repeatedly make? And then what would you advise somebody to don't make that mistake if you have to pick one?
Sell first, right? Meaning what we were just talking about, right? Find that problem, and you can pretty much only find the problem by selling first. So I think like you know the classic advice of like talking to customers, but really it's more about like listening to customers
Yeah.
and so
Yes.
sell so that you know that what you're selling is something people want to buy.
Is there a lesson here that you think you learned the hard way that makes you believe that how products should be built?
I think it's that lesson. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I
maybe
would
this
think
was
so.
so there's pros and cons from our origin story of being a spin out. And I think
True.
the con was we had a default customer and it was sort of like whatever, that whatever was the priority of that one customer, which was just our parent organization at the time, like that was our
Right, right.
priority. But that was just one customer's priority. That didn't represent the rest of the market. So yeah, the reason I think my brain goes to that piece of advice is because it was the first piece of advice we had to like give ourselves. It's like if we're going to bring EcoSuite to the rest of the market, we got to be listening to the rest of the market very, very actively. And that was step number one for doing what we're doing today.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you so much. I think that was a really insightful conversation. Especially, I think I appreciated your perspective on the gaps, execution, interconnection, the ambitions that we talked about. I think at Analytics we analyze problems in similar dynamics, but I think it's really powerful to hear how realities play out when somebody like you is operating kind of inside the system, right? I think the transition isn't just about innovation. I think it's about that disciplined execution, that informed decision making that you and I today kind of spoke about. So thank you for being here today. And I think I would like to thank everybody who would be listening in to barrels from barrels to batteries. Brought to you by Energetics. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow the show and share it with someone who, like Joel and me, cares about the future of energy. This is Mohit Kaul signing off. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mohit. A lot of fun.